I'm Maggie Newell, the Adirondack Mountain Club's Outreach Coordinator. Thank you to the Lake George Land Conservancy for having us here this evening. I'm really excited to share some Leave No Trace facts with you this evening. It's a great time of year to start thinking about Leave No Trace so we can have less of an impact as we play this summer. So I work for the Adirondack Mountain Club, and the Adirondack Mountain Club is a nonprofit that works to protect New York wildlands and waters by promoting responsible outdoor recreation and building a statewide constituency of land stewardship advocates. I work at our office in Lake Placid on Heart Lake, and as the outreach coordinator, a lot of what I do is work with our 4th grade school program, 3 Seasons at Heart Lake. But ADK also has trail crews that are out working in the backcountry. We operate the High Peaks Information Center. If you've ever hiked in the High Peaks, you may have started at our trailhead there. And we also have an office in Lake George that hosts our membership department. And we do have 27 chapters across New York State and 30,000 members across the country. So we are a membership organization. But we're really excited to be here today. So, what is Leave No Trace? So the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics is based in Boulder, Colorado. And they have a small staff with a big dream. Their mission is protecting the outdoors by teaching people to enjoy it responsibly. So Leave No Trace is a framework that we can use to make decisions while we're recreating outside. And since the 1990s, we've been seeing a huge increase in outdoor recreation, which is awesome. We're so happy to see more people out enjoying the natural world. But it's really important that as we have higher visitors, we don't see higher impacts. So the best way to combat impacts in the backcountry is Leave No Trace education. So Leave No Trace is a set of 7 principles that can guide us while we're recreating outside and help us make decisions. So the first principle is plan ahead and prepare. And this is everything we do in advance before we ever hit the trail so that we know we can have a safe and fun adventure. So proper planning is living the experience in advance. If we really plan to a T, completely do step 1, plan ahead and prepare, the other principles kind of fall into place. So the first thing we want to keep in mind with plan ahead and prepare is that you need to do your research. You should know a lot about the place you're going, what regulations there may be. In our High Peaks wilderness in the Adirondacks, there are a lot of specific regulations that are important to keep in mind, like group size limits. And by doing that research in advance, you know you can fully comply. Another thing is hazards. For example, if you're going to be somewhere where there are rattlesnakes, that might be something you really want to know. So what hazards are going to be in the area? And also the weather. You want to know the weather not just during your trip, but a couple days before. There's a lot of rain right before your trip. It might not be as easy to do that stream crossing you were planning to do. So knowing what the weather is during your trip and before, and maybe after. If your trip gets delayed a little bit, you end up in the woods longer than you expect, and there's a big cold front coming through, you may pack a little extra warmth if you know that cold weather is coming. Another part of plan ahead and prepare that's especially important in the Adirondacks is to have a plan A and a backup plan. So a lot of our trailheads see a lot of traffic. We've got parking lots that fill up in the wee hours of the morning. So having a backup plan, another destination, can help your day, not just to be a bump in the road at the beginning of your day, instead of throwing your whole plan into a spiral. And when you're choosing your plan A and your plan B, you want to really think about the experience and skill level of your group. It would be too bad if we bring our friend hiking for the first time and it's a little too hard, it's not very much fun, and they don't try it again, right? We want to hook people to the outdoor experiences we enjoy by bringing them on things that they can be successful on, and for ourselves, right? If we're making it through our hike with just the last breath of air, it's really challenging, we may be putting ourselves in a dangerous situation. So you want to make sure that what you plan to hike matches the skill level of yourself and your group. And then finally, you want to pack for the unexpected. If you have a full backpack and have extra things so that you can deal with any inconveniences that you come across, you're much more likely to have a safe and successful trip. In 2020, there were 492 rescues done in New York State by the Forest Service. How many of those things could have been prevented with just a little extra planning? So really important when we're planning is packing. And we like to use the 10 essentials as our list for what we're going to bring with us on any adventure. So number one is navigation. You want to have a map and compass to help guide you along the way. There are some cool apps. A lot of people use their phone for navigation these days, which is great. Those can be really helpful, but you always want to have a paper map and compass backup. If our phone slides off a cliff while we're taking that selfie or drops into the stream and we lose our navigation, that could put us in a situation where we need help. So having that paper map backup is really important. Sun protection, of course, insulation, extra layers. Especially as we go up in elevation, as you go up some high peaks, you may encounter weather that's a lot colder than you initially expected. Even every month of the year, right? Our alpine summits can be really windy and have colder weather significantly, even in July and August. So having extra warm layers is important. Illumination, a headlamp or flashlight. Again, this is another situation where if we're relying on our cell phones and they take a dip, we're going to be out of luck. So having a headlamp or flashlight is really important. A first aid kit, of course, to deal with any injuries that could happen on your trip. A fire starter is another thing that's on this list. It can be a little less essential, right? So a fire would be something to deal with an emergency, but if you have instead extra layers for warmth, you're not having to start a fire. So this one, fire maybe is less helpful, but another one on the list. A repair kit and tools. This could be as simple as some duct tape. If the sole of your boot starts to peel off, that's one that happens. If you're only using your hiking boots a few times a year, that could be an issue you run into. So even having like some duct tape wrapped around a water bottle could make that gear item usable to make it comfortably back to the trailhead. A nutrition system, food is another one of the 10 essentials, and you want to, of course, have extra food. If you get delayed, you can comfortably continue to eat. Hydration, so plenty of water, but also a water filter is a great and important thing to have with you on any trip. Emergency shelter, so this would be as simple as a space blanket, or if you're backpacking, you already have your tent with you, that would be your emergency shelter. And then a trowel and toilet paper, so we can go to the bathroom, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. So these are our 10 essentials. If we pack some version of all of these things, and right, they can be simple, some first aid kits they make are quite small for 1 or 2 people. But having all of these things can really help you deal with those challenges you could face on a trip by yourself and not have to call in the forest rangers, and you can stay comfortable, keep yourself safe, and make it back to your car with the 10 essentials. All right, principle number 2 is travel and camp on durable surfaces. So when we're thinking about leave no trace, we are trying to avoid the unavoidable impacts. Nope, we're trying to avoid the avoidable impacts and minimize the unavoidable impacts. So one of the unavoidable impacts is where our feet go, right? We can't float above the ground as we recreate outside. So our footsteps will have an impact. And when we're choosing where to place our feet, we want to consider what a durable surface is. So what is a durable surface? A durable surface is something that is resistant and resilient. So a surface that's resistant, this is like our bare rock surface. We can walk on it a bunch of times and nothing about it will really change. The other is resilient. So something that's resilient is it bounces back quickly after impact. So this would be something like our lawn grass, can walk on it a bunch of times and for the most part, it'll bounce back. there are some surfaces that are not resilient to being walked on. And a really notable example in the Adirondacks is our alpine vegetation. So we have only 21 summits in the Adirondack with alpine vegetation, and it's only about 173 acres. So less than Central Park of alpine zone in all of New York State. So these really rare and fragile ecosystems are left behind from the last glacial era. So glaciers swept all the way down as far as New Jersey and then receded. And what was left was kind of an Arctic tundra-like environment. After a long time, trees came back in from the south and left this Arctic tundra, these rare plants only on top of some of our tallest peaks. They're really well adapted to survive on top of these mountains. We have hurricane force winds every month of the year. There's only about 60 days frost free on these summits. So they're really adapted, these rare alpine plants, to those harsh conditions, but they are not adapted to being walked on. Just a handful of steps can kill some of these alpine grasses, right? That might look like grass that you find in other locations, but these special species on the summits are really fragile. So to protect this fragile ecosystem, the rarest ecosystem in New York State, we just want to stick to the bare rock above tree line. These plants are clinging to just a little bit of soil, and also where there's gravel, right, that's holding soil in place. So by sticking just to the bare rock, we can protect these fragile plants. And we also want to be sure to stick to durable surfaces when we're choosing where to camp. So a lot of times in the Adirondacks, our land managers have designated campsites, and that's the perfect place to stay, right? So just like our footsteps have an impact, where we choose to lay down for 8 hours has an effect on the ground. So by staying at designated campsites, we're concentrating those impacts so that the place where all the vegetation's getting swept away and we're seeing this dark spot, right, where clearly many people have spent the night in a tent, we want to use that same spot and concentrate our impact at that site. Dispose of waste properly. One more note with travel and camp on durable surfaces before we move on is that we can also stay on durable surfaces when we're in the water. So while we're paddling, there could be open water and then lily pads along the edges. And by sticking to the open water, we can leave that plant vegetation undisturbed, that aquatic vegetation. And especially if you're in a motorboat, you will appreciate keeping your prop away from those things. Principle number 3 is dispose of waste properly. And the easiest thing to remember with that is pack it in, pack it out. Anything that we bring into the woods with us, we want to bring back out. So this can even go as far as apple cores and banana and orange peels. This is one thing that maybe growing up, I certainly learned that it was okay, these things are biodegradable, to maybe toss them out the car window. But what we know now is that if something can't get to the place you're recreating on its own, if it couldn't be there without you being there, it's probably not good to leave it behind. So apple cores, banana peels are not familiar to our wildlife. They look like food and they smell like food, and they can take 2 years to decompose. So they're around. Our wildlife may ingest things that aren't food, and they're going to stick around for a long time and take a long time to decompose. So it's best to pack them out with us. What other kinds of waste might we generate while we're recreating outside? So we talked about trash and we want to bring that out with us. What about when you have to go to the bathroom? So that's something else we can't avoid doing, right? We're going to have to go to the bathroom while we're out in the backcountry. So the first thing is that if there is a restroom facility available, you should use that. An outhouse that's been dug is a place that's been designated to concentrate human waste in the backcountry. So when there's an outhouse available, we can use that. When there's no outhouse available and you have to poop, the best thing to do is dig a cat hole. So a cat hole is a 6 to 8 inch hole that you poop in. So you want to go 200 feet away from the trail, from water, and from campsites and from roads, from anything 200 feet away, which is about 70 adult steps. So 70 big steps away from the trail. Then you can use a poop kit. So here I have a picture. You can have a trowel with you to help dig the hole. And if you don't have a trowel, you can also use the heel of a shoe. That works pretty well. Just kind of kick your heel into the ground to help dig a hole. Then you crouch down. You can hold on or lean against a tree for extra support if you need, and you poop. If anything misses the hole, you can use a stick to help it in there, but you want to keep your trowel clean. Your trowel only touches the soil. And then it is fine to use toilet paper and then bury it in the cat hole with your waste, or you can pack it out. And then you have a little bit of hand sanitizer in your pack, so you can sanitize your hands before packing up your potty kit and heading on your way. So burying human waste is the best way to dispose of it in the backcountry. If you are peeing, it's best to also go about 200 feet away from the trail. A lot of times, if you're staying at a campsite, there might be one tree that's just like 10 feet outside of the site that when it gets late, that's where everyone seems to want to go to the bathroom. But over time, we have hundreds of people staying in this site all summer. That tree may start to smell. It's really not pleasant. So again, just moving away from the campsite to pee is best. And if you use toilet paper, it's best to pack that out, or you can bury it. And then menstrual products should be packed out, or products like a Diva cup, menstrual cups, you can dig a cat hole and put the blood in the cat hole also is another option. And that's what a lot of thru hikers will use. Alrighty, so principle number 4 is leave what you find. And that one's pretty self-explanatory, right? So we want to leave the things we find while we're playing outside there for others to enjoy. You can remember, don't steal my wow. There was something so amazing that you saw while you were outside that you were inclined to bring it home with you. Probably other people will have that same response. So we should leave those items behind, leave that beautiful flower blooming right by the trail so that people who come behind us can also enjoy it. And leave what you find also relates to not altering natural areas. So for this, you want to think about if you've ever maybe visited a stream and seen just hundreds of rock stacks out in the water. That's a really visual reminder, right? That this is a place where lots of people have been. You're not the first one here. You're kind of missing out on that wild experience, and instead you're seeing all of these things that people have made. So we want to leave natural areas looking natural, leave rocks in their natural place. The one exception to that is you might see above tree line rock cairns, and those are really big, well-constructed rock stacks that are used for navigation. Those are different than the stack of one rock after another that's more artistic expression. So we want to leave natural areas looking natural. And the other piece of leave what you find is we also don't want to bring new things into the natural environment. Don't move hitchhikers. So this is really where we're referring to invasive species. So an invasive species is a species that's not naturally found in an area. It's typically introduced by people. And what really sets invasive species apart is that they are able to outcompete natural plants and animals and really take over an area. So aquatic invasive species are introduced typically by boaters, and they can be introduced by motorboats, but also attached to canoes, kayaks, even our paddles. Any of that could potentially have small amounts of plant matter on it that get introduced to a new body of water and grow very quickly and can grow into dense mats across bodies of water that make it hard to boat or swim. And we really don't want this happening to our water bodies. So to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species, we should clean, drain, and dry our boats before moving them between water bodies. And if you're moving boats a lot, I suggest you do even more research into that on your own. But there are boat wash stations here in the Adirondacks that are a great way to get your boat cleaned. They use hot water and really kill any plant matter that could be attached. So those Adirondack Watershed Institute boat wash stations are a great way to clean your boat before moving it between water bodies. Because it would be too bad if we were the ones to introduce a new invasive species to our favorite body of water. And there are invasives already in our Adirondack waterways. Lake Champlain has a lot of invasives in it, I think almost 50. Lake George also has a couple instances of aquatic invasives. So as we're moving between water bodies, we want to always be sure to clean, drain, and dry our boats. And this isn't just for water. Another way that aquatic species, or not aquatic, that terrestrial species get moved can be through firewood. One example of this is the emerald ash borer. So that is an invasive that attacks our ash trees, and it's already found in a couple places in the Adirondacks near Scroon Lake. We really don't want it to move anywhere else. So we should not be moving firewood from one location to another. If you're planning for a camping trip, maybe you have a tree down in the backyard and you're tempted to cut that up to bring as firewood. That is not what you want to do. You want to buy firewood at your destination to prevent the spread of invasive species. Alrighty, principle number 5 is minimize campfire impacts. So Leave No Trace is not anti-campfire, it is pro-responsible campfire. So when we are going camping, campfires may be an iconic part of that experience. And you just want to make sure you've done your research and can do it responsibly. So first, you want to check the regulations where you're going. Not everywhere allows fires, and you need to know that before you get there. So notably, the high peaks, the Mercy Dam, Lake Colden area, Johnsbrook Valley do not allow campfires. So in those areas, you need to have an alternative plan to stay warm and cook your food. And also, you should check on fire risk. There are sometimes burn bans, even in areas where fires are typically allowed. So you want to make sure that conditions and regulations allow you to have a fire before your trip. Next thing, consider alternatives. Camping stoves are a really efficient way to cook our food that you might choose instead of a campfire. And also having plenty of warm layers and not relying on fires for warmth. And another reason folks might have campfires is for the ambiance of it. But even something as simple as a candle could give us that something to look at while we sit around in the evening for enjoyment without having to go through the trouble of making a campfire. But if you do choose to have a campfire, the best place to do it is a designated fire ring. So a lot of campsites will have a ring of rocks that would serve as the fire pit. And when we have a campfire, about as high up as our flames go into the air is how far the heat penetrates into the ground. So all of the roots living in the soil, the living layer of the soil, all of that is being affected by the heat of our fire. So that's why using a designated fire ring has that impact concentrated in the place where other people are having fires. If there isn't a designated fire ring and you're choosing to have a fire, you don't want to just have it on the ground because you're creating a new spot where that heat's going to get in the ground and also potential for fire around there, and also not on a bare rock surface. Really using a designated fire ring is the best way to go. And then when we're building our fire, we want to use dead, down, dinky, and distant wood. So dead wood will burn better and is already on the ground, so we're not damaging plants or trees to get our wood. Dead and down. Dinky, we want to choose wood that's pretty small because we want to burn everything in our fire completely. So we say probably not much bigger than our wrist. And then finally, distant. We've all been to campsites before where every piece of matter on the ground. There's not a single stick in sight, has all been picked clean. It's really not very natural. In the Adirondacks, we have a lot of woody debris on the ground, and that will decompose and go to build the soil layer. It's really part of the ecosystem. So instead of making our campsites look like they're raked clean by just walking a ways away from our campsite to collect wood, we can help preserve the natural ground covering where we're camping. And then finally, we want to be sure our fire is completely out and cool before we leave. So pouring water on your fire, stirring around the embers until they're totally out, and it should be cool to the touch. There are instances in recent memory where campfires have gotten out of control and caused small fires here in the Adirondacks. We really don't want to be burning any parts of our forests from our recreational campfires. So by making sure our fire is completely out, we can do our part to stop that from happening. Alrighty, principle number 6 is respect wildlife. Wildlife are an amazing thing to see while we're out exploring, but we can help respect that wildlife by observing them from a distance. Remember, we're visitors in wildlife's home, and for the most part, it's pretty stressful for them to see us, right? The natural behavior of wildlife towards people is avoidance. So to prevent stressing out our animals too much, we can observe from a distance. And one thing to keep in mind to help gauge how far away we should be is the rule of thumb. So for the rule of thumb, you stretch your arm all the way out in front of you and try to cover the animal with your thumb. If you can cover the animal, you're probably a good distance away. So for something like a bear or a moose, some of our largest Adirondack animals, you want to be pretty far away from the animal while you're observing it. For other creatures, squirrels, insects, for those we can be quite a bit closer, right? For that thumb to cover it measure. So store food properly. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We also want to avoid wildlife during sensitive times. So some sensitive times to keep in mind are mating season, while they're rearing their young. Also, dawn and dusk are times when wildlife is the most active. So one great thing we can do is avoid cooking right as the sun is setting, right at dusk. That's when a lot of animals are the most active. Our bears maybe are starting to come out to look for their meal. So avoiding putting our food smells into the air at that time is a good idea. And also we want to control our pets at all times. You may know not to go chasing after wildlife on a hike, but our pets don't always. So keeping them controlled, really well trained, or often on a leash is a great way to make sure our pets are not disturbing wildlife. And also important to note, there are some places where dogs are required to be on leashes. So that's another thing you may come across in your research phase. And then store your food properly. This is a really, really important part of respecting wildlife. So as I mentioned before, avoidance is the natural behavior of wildlife towards us. And we really want it to stay that way, right? The danger is when animals start to associate people with food. And this can happen kind of innocently, right? Maybe you drop a few crumbs out of your lunchbox on the summit. But if everyone does that every day, or even a few people do that every day, suddenly we have chipmunks who are hanging out on top of some of our highest peaks and hopping into people's laps looking for snacks. So even those small pieces of food are a calorie reward for an animal, and they're going to keep coming back to that. So avoiding leaving any food behind is really important. And so how do we store our food? One really easy to use option is a bear resistant canister, this black container here on the left. So this has a locking mechanism on the top. and is specially designed so there's no seams in it that a bear can get a tooth or anything into. It's too big for them to get their jaw around, and it's just like this slippery thing. So it's not smell proof, so a bear may come up and smell it, but they'll knock it around. They won't be able to get any food out, and they're on their way. So these animals are going to be attracted to the smell of our food. Bears can smell for miles, but we just want to have it stored so that when they get there, they have no reward and no reason to keep coming back to the same spot. But let's say someone accidentally left a candy bar in their backpack. So everything else is in the bear can, but the candy bar is in the backpack. So the bear chews through the side of the backpack and gets the candy bar, right? Now this bear could potentially become habituated to human food, right? If this keeps happening and wildlife keep coming back to the same place and getting rewarded, they're going to become more and more used to people, associate people with food, with those calorie rewards, and they'll start seeking that out. And that's when we have bears that are perceived as aggressive, and that's really not good for the bears or for people. So we want to stop this potential dangerous cascade way before it happens by storing all of our food appropriately. And bear canisters are required in the high peaks, in that Lake Colden, Marcy Dam, Johns Brook camping areas. You need a bear canister for overnight camping, because our Adirondack bears are really smart and they started figuring out the alternative, which is a bear hang. But bear hangs work in a lot of other areas, and they are acceptable if you're camping in the St. Regis canoe area, in the Lake George area. Bear hang is another option. And a bear hang needs to be 12 feet off the ground, because that's about as high as a bear can reach, or they can reach about 10 feet, right? So we need a little bit more than that. 5 feet away from the tree and 5 feet below the branch. I would even say 6 feet, because our bears can climb trees. So if they're climbing the tree and swiping their arm out to the side, are they going to be able to reach that bag you have your food in, or coming from the branch above it? So it needs to be away from the trees so that they can't reach it. Yeah, and that can be tricky, especially if you're in denser woods where the trees are not being as cooperative and having branches that are perfectly laid out for you. And it takes some time, right? You're going and throwing your food bag or your rope over a branch over and over to try to get that to work. For the food canister, you walk 200 feet, 70 steps away from your campsite and set it down, and there your food is stored. So a bear can is a really easy to use way to store your food. So the only annoyance is fitting it in your backpack. But however you choose to, making sure that wildlife don't get your food is essential for the safety of our Adirondack wildlife. So thank you for your help in protecting our bears. Finally, principle number 7 is be considerate of other visitors. So this is the golden rule of leave no trace. We want to share this resource that we're using, right? When we're in the backcountry, we're sharing it with everyone else who's hiking it today and hiking it into the future. So by picking up after ourselves, we are helping to keep this place beautiful for future visitors. By leaving that beautiful wildflower, we're sharing that wow with the next person who comes along. Also, when we get to the summit, right, we have a small area that we're sharing, or so in those cases, right, we can even be careful of where we're standing. If there's one perfect spot for the photo, we want to take our moment, get our picture, and then step back to let the next visitor have their moment. Another way we can be considerate of other visitors is to yield to them on the trail. So typically we say that downhill traffic, if you're hiking downhill, should yield to uphill traffic. And the thought behind that is if you're hiking uphill, you've got some momentum going, it's easier for you to keep moving than if you stop. It takes a lot more momentum to keep going uphill compared to if you're coming downhill and stop, you've already got that gravity helping you out to keep on your way. So yielding to others is another way to help leave no trace. And now that you know a little bit about resistant and resilient surfaces, how to stay on durable surfaces, I often choose to step to the side, especially for a break when I'm heading uphill. But I know that I can step to the side safely, find a rock or a clear place on the ground to step aside, avoid the beautiful wildflowers along the way. So a lot of times I just choose to step aside to onto a rock to share the trail, share this resource with everyone who's out. Another way we can be considerate of others is to let natural sounds prevail. So we are all looking for different experiences when we come to the backcountry. Maybe you're on a Father's Day hike and enjoying that time with your family, but other people are out on a birding trip. So they're really there to listen to the sounds of the woods. We want to make sure that our actions aren't preventing anyone else from having the experiences they want. So keeping our voices relatively low while we're outside in natural areas and sharing those resources can help everyone to have a fun time while they are outside. Yeah, so let's all leave no trace this summer. Thank you for being here today. This is your first step to planning ahead and prepare for your next adventure. So thank you for your help in leaving no trace. And another thing just to keep in mind with Leave No Trace is that we're all at our own point in our outdoor recreation journey. During COVID, I think a lot more people have been getting outside, which is awesome. And, you know, everyone goes out for their first time. We all make mistakes. We all have to learn at some point, maybe that you can't leave your banana peel behind, or that I really need a headlamp anytime I go out for a hike and not just my cell phone. So be kind and encourage people to leave no trace as they're exploring this summer. Thank you.